Pressure mounts on the New South Wales government to scrap the promotion of a horse race on the sales of the Sydney Opera House. A push to ban anti-abortion protests makes its way to the High Court. Campaigners argue state laws go too far. The Federal Environment Minister rejects a climate report suggesting the phasing out of coal production to limit global warming. And Donald Trump oversees the swearing-in of Brett Kavanaugh, despite sexual assault allegations against the judge. Welcome to ABC News. I'm Fauziah Ibrahim. Let's take a quick look at the weather. In the capital cities around the nation today, Brisbane a possible shower or storm, Sydney cloud increasing, Canberra a late shower or two, Melbourne showers increasing, Hobart showers becoming windy, Adelaide a shower or two, Perth can expect showers with a possible storm, and Darwin sunny with a top of 35. Well, the debate over a decision to use the sales of the Opera House to promote a horse race has intensified. Thousands of people are opposing the move, and an online petition has garnered more than 250,000 signatures. A protest outside the landmark icon has been organised for tonight. Our reporter Amy Greenbank joins us now from Sydney. Now, Amy, this is a very contentious issue. There are demonstrations that are planned tonight. Tell us about this online petition. How many signatures has it garnered so far?
We're now up to 250,000, as you mentioned, but it is growing. At one point there, we're getting dozens of signatures per minute, and people are still signing. Even the petition has been now handed into the New South Wales Parliament. However, Fauziah, it is largely symbolic now. There is no way it can be discussed in the New South Wales Parliament ahead of the Everest horse race. But the founder of the petition, Mike Woodcock, says it's still a win for the little people, as he handed the petition in to Greens MP Jenny Leong this morning.
That's really gratifying that so many people don't think it's the right way to do business in Sydney and New South Wales. I mean, the idea that someone can bully a public official just because they're doing their job and ask them to break the rules and threaten their job if they don't get their way, that's not Australian in any way.
Mike Woodcock there. Now, we know too, Amy, that broadcaster Alan Jones has made a public apology to Louise Herron, the chief executive of the Opera House. What did he have to say?
He has indeed, and this apology comes after this petition was launched. Now, originally it was launched because of these abrasive comments he made towards the head of the Sydney Opera House, Louise Herron. But now that it's garnered so many signatures, this morning on his radio program, he delivered an apology of sorts. He said he was regretful that his comments had caused such offence.
I used some words in these programs about the Everest and the Opera House and about Louise, which in hindsight I now most regret having heard the impact that they've clearly had on some people. In relation to Louise, on Friday I was tough regarding an issue that I and others felt very important.
Now, Amy, there's been some concern that this will actually start or be a precedent for other advertisers. Is there any action being proposed to avoid a similar situation in the future?
We've just heard from independent MP Alex Greenwich. He says that he will be moving to amend the Sydney Opera House Trust Act, which effectively would give the executives of the Sydney Opera House more power in future to reject such promotions. But he has admitted this is unlikely to make its way through the New South Wales Parliament. Meantime, he says he will be personally attending the protest, which is going to be held tonight from 7:30. He says he expects thousands, if not tens of thousands, to attend this protest. Now, the event is expected to kick off at around 8 o'clock tonight, when colours from the horses will be displayed on the Opera House. It's expected to run for about an hour in total, but there's this specific window that has most people concerned, which is where there'll be more targeted advertising, if you like, for the Everest horse race. There will be the barrier draw, the Everest trophy displayed. That's only going to happen for several minutes. Originally, it was slated for around 8:30 tonight, but a spokesperson from Racing New South Wales says that time is now kept under wraps because they're concerned about violence. The New South Wales Police have also increased security ahead of this public protest, Fauziah.
Amy Greenbank there reporting for us in Sydney. Thank you. Now, the High Court in Canberra has begun hearing appeals against safe zones around abortion clinics. The challenges against laws in Tasmania and Victoria were brought by two anti-abortion activists, both charged for protesting too close to clinics. But the state governments and women's health activists say that the laws protect women from harassment. Well, for more, I'm joined by reporter Elizabeth Byrne. Now, Elizabeth, take us through what was heard at the hearing this morning.
Well, so far today we've heard from the lawyers for the two protesters, and they've been highlighting the importance of protest in our political system and its importance to freedom of political expression, and raising issues like, for instance, that the laws also cover circumstances where the anti-abortion protesters might want to tell someone about, might want to give information to someone who's asking why they might not have an abortion, that someone who wants information from them, so to speak. So we've had a few examples put to the court of that, and that is the main thrust of this case, that they have a freedom to, or they believe they should have a freedom to express their political point of view, but they say these laws are denying them that.
Explain to us just how these laws actually work.
Well, in Victoria, for instance, the law says that you can't protest within, or you can't do anything that might upset someone seeking a termination within 150 metres of an abortion clinic. In Tasmania, it's a little bit different. It's only if you protest about it. So Kathleen Clubb from Victoria, for instance, had been trying to hand a couple of pamphlets to a couple going into a clinic. The other person charged had been involved in a protest in Hobart. So the operation is a little bit different. We don't know whether that will affect the way the High Court deals with this, but fundamentally they say the issue is the same. They should be allowed to put across their point of view.
And Elizabeth, what's been the response from the two state governments?
Well, the state governments haven't had their turn to say anything yet, but in submissions to the court, they basically say, even if this is a political issue that we're dealing with, and there is a burden on the campaigners' right to express their opinion, that is a small thing compared to the much greater importance of protecting citizens who might suffer upset or some other kind of hurt from someone protesting when they're going into an abortion clinic.
Elizabeth Byrne reporting for us in Canberra. Thank you. The Federal Environment Minister, Melissa Price, says it would be irresponsible to committing to phasing out coal-fired power by 2050. She was responding to a report from leading scientists warning that the use of coal needs to be eliminated to save the Great Barrier Reef. For more, our political reporter Henry Bello joins us from Canberra. So, Henry, the government says that it will consider the IPCC's report, but the minister is critical of one of its key recommendations.
Yes, that's right. This UN Climate Panel report says that the world would need to virtually eliminate the use of coal in electricity by 2050 if there's any hope of saving the Great Barrier Reef from climate change. Now, the Federal Environment Minister, Melissa Price, says she hasn't read that full report by 90 scientists, but she's rejected one of the central tenets of that report, arguing that the panel has drawn a very long bow when it says that coal would need to be completely phased out. She argues that they haven't considered the role that technology plays in making coal-fired power cleaner in the coming years. She says the coalition government makes no apology for focusing on cheaper electricity and that coal will continue to play a role in Australia's energy mix. Now, the Prime Minister Scott Morrison yesterday said that this UN report needed to be considered in the global context and that Australia accounts for just over 1% of global emissions. But his Environment Minister, Melissa Price, this morning admitting that electricity emissions have increased in Australia in recent years, but she insists that the coalition government is still on track to meeting its emission reduction targets under the Paris Climate Change Agreement, arguing that scientists who say otherwise are merely sharing opinions. Let's have a listen to a part of her interview with Sabra Lane on AM this morning.
say that it's got to be phased out by 2050 is drawing a very long bow. But, you know, we're a responsible government. We look at these things as they do.
It's drawing a long bow. These are 91 scientists who their work is peer-reviewed. This is a report that Australia has approved of.
I just don't know how you could say by 2050 that you're not going to have technology that's going to enable good, clean technology when it comes to coal.
Environment Minister Melissa Price there speaking on AM earlier this morning. So, Henry, what's been Labor's reaction to the report?
Well, the Shadow Energy Minister, Mark Butler, says this is a deeply confronting report that shows that nations need to go further in addressing climate change, going beyond some of the targets that were set and agreed to by many nations under that Paris Climate Change Agreement. He points out that Australia is now one of only few countries in the world where pollution has actually increased in the last couple of years, although that point is contested by the federal government. Labor, of course, has a policy of reducing emissions by 45% by 2030, with a goal of eventually ending up with zero emissions by 2050. Mark Butler also pointing out that the Liberal state government in New South Wales has a similar policy of getting to zero emissions by 2050, arguing that that's something that the federal government should adopt themselves as they try and meet the targets set in this UN report.
Henry Bello in Canberra, thank you. The government is a step closer to imposing strict visa conditions on some new migrants, all part of efforts to address congestion in major capital cities. The new conditions would require the migrants to settle in regional areas for at least 5 years. Population growth has outstripped forecasts by almost 100% in the past decade in Australia's biggest cities. It's left transport and infrastructure lagging. In Sydney and Melbourne, peak hour travel times are now more than 50% longer than the off-peak. Minister for Population and Urban Infrastructure, Alan Tudge, says new migrants could be forced to live in certain areas for a number of years.
Well, it's a four-part plan. I mean, the first two parts involve heavy investment in infrastructure. The third part involves a decentralisation agenda, taking a bit of pressure off the very rapidly growing population centres of Melbourne, Sydney and South East Queensland, and growing some of the smaller states in the regional areas. And the fourth element of the plan is actually having a more coordinated population planning process where we integrate our infrastructure investment with our forecast population growth rates. The essential issue we have at the moment is that nearly all of the growth in Australia is into the three big population centres of Melbourne, Sydney and South East Queensland. And that's putting enormous pressure on Melbourne and Sydney particularly, and we see that in the congestion on the roads every single day. If we had a better distribution of the growth across the country, it would take the pressure off those big cities and help the development of the regional areas and the smaller states. Now, the biggest lever there is the migration lever, because most of the growth has been from migration, about 60% of it. So even if we get a little bit more of the immigration intake going to some of those smaller states, such as South Australia, it helps them and it helps Melbourne and Sydney. We actually need to have a more coordinated, concerted population planning process, which involves the state governments and more directly determines where our population will grow, and having the infrastructure to match it and ideally put in place in advance of that growth rather than behind it. We already slowed down the immigration rate just slightly last year, and we look at the immigration rate every single year. But the key issue here is the distribution of the growth, more than the actual growth number. If we had a better distribution of the growth, we wouldn't have quite the same amount of pressure as we do today on Melbourne, Sydney and South East Queensland. When somebody's on a visa, then we can easily place conditions upon it. Now, we haven't announced all the details exactly how we're going to do that yet, but it's reasonably straightforward to do that. Many people do come into the country already on the points-based system, for example, and when they do so, sometimes they already get bonus points if they go to the regional areas or they go to some of the smaller states. But the evidence shows they might use the bonus points to go to some of the smaller states, but not necessarily stay there for very long. So we want to provide that A, the encouragement, and B, put some conditions upon a person who might want to go to the smaller states, help the growth rate of those smaller states or indeed the regions, and in doing so it takes the pressure off the bigger cities of Melbourne, Sydney and South East Queensland.
That's Alan Tudge there. Now, parents of elite young gymnasts are alleging that their children were subjected to cruel punishments and verbal abuse. The incidents reportedly occurred at Melbourne's National Centre of Excellence. There are concerns an investigation into their complaints was prematurely shut down. Reporter Peter Lusted has more.
The allegations centre around the National Centre of Excellence in Melbourne. Now, parents have alleged that these kids were given punishments, stuff such as they were made to do handstands for sort of more than 6 minutes until their arms gave out, squats until their legs gave out, or even in some cases swinging on bars until their hands bled. These punishments were given for small things in some cases. It could be they weren't doing a trick properly, poor performance, or even in some cases speaking out of turn at training as well. There's been cases, I guess, when there's some particulars where parents have told me where their child has come back and they've said, oh, look, they've been very concerned because it may be that these gymnasts do all sorts of things. They're regularly injured and there'll be different injuries on different parts of their bodies, and the parents have obviously expressed concern when that has happened. They did start an investigation. So this was back in May. They hired an independent investigator and they said that person then looked into the allegations. Parents, I've actually seen 4 of the formal complaints. It's a lot of documents, a lot of talking just about the allegations. What then happened was in August, the CEO of Gymnastics Australia, Kitty Chiller, put out a statement to the parents which said that the investigation had been concluded after they had received an interim report from the independent investigator. There was a short statement which listed a few points. The key ones were that after looking at that interim report, Gymnastics Australia found that the majority of the allegations were quote-unquote incomplete, which confused a lot of parents with that wording. The other key finding was that the interim report had been handed down, and Gymnastics Australia, after looking at that, had found that none of its staff members were in breach of their contracts. This investigation, we talked to 16 parents who've said their concerns. They're not just in Victoria, that's across 3 states. They talk of a culture where this is happening, the verbal abuse consistently happening, physical abuse in many cases as well, and also a culture where parents fear and kids are feared to go forward and make complaints.
A former employee of a woman found dead south of Sydney has appeared in court charged with murder. Police arrested 29-year-old Banu Kirkman in Maitland in the Hunter region yesterday. He's accused of killing 39-year-old Kirsty Powell, who was found dead in her Bellambi home on Friday. He didn't apply for bail and the matter was adjourned to Wollongong next week. A search is underway to find the occupant of a house in Melbourne's east, destroyed by fire overnight. Emergency services were called to the home in Upwey. The Country Fire Authority says a teenager was found outside the property, but one resident is unaccounted for. The cause of the blaze is also being investigated. In overseas news, Judge Brett Kavanaugh has been sworn in as the new US Supreme Court Justice. US President Donald Trump presided over the White House ceremony. Mr. Kavanaugh was officially sworn in by the court's Chief Justice John Roberts. Mr. Trump apologised to Mr. Kavanaugh for enduring pain and suffering after being accused of sexual assault.
On behalf of our nation, I want to apologize to Brett and the entire Kavanaugh family for the terrible pain and suffering you have been forced to endure. Those who step forward to serve our country deserve a fair and dignified evaluation, not a campaign of political and personal destruction based on lies and deception. What happened to the Kavanaugh family violates every notion of fairness, decency, and due process. Our country, a man or a woman, must always be presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty.
Thank you for the great honor of appointing me to serve as a justice of the Supreme Court. I've seen firsthand your deep appreciation for the vital role of the American judiciary. I am grateful for your steadfast, unwavering support throughout this process.
New York officials say a limousine involved in a fatal crash had failed a recent safety inspection. 20 people died in the tragedy. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says the vehicle had been rebuilt violating federal law. It's also been revealed that the vehicle's driver was not properly licensed. He also died in the accident along with 17 passengers and 2 bystanders. The company that owned the limousine has been shut down while investigations continue. A Spanish court has found that an 85-year-old retired doctor is guilty of stealing newborn babies and giving them to infertile couples. The incidents occurred more than 40 years ago. But judges also ruled that Dr. Eduardo Vela will not be punished because his crimes fell outside the statute of limitations. Campaigners say they'll be appealing against the ruling. Dr. Vela is the first person to go on trial for what's believed to be numerous illegal adoptions that took place during the Franco dictatorship. Let's turn our attention now to finance news. Alicia Berry joins me in the studio now. Now, the Commonwealth Bank, Alicia, has started repaying customers for the fees that were unauthorised.
Well, that's right. At the Banking Royal Commission so far, we have heard that the Commonwealth Bank has charged dead people and has charged fees for service that wasn't provided. It really has come under fire for these actions, and CBA today has said it will refund the customers who were charged for service they didn't receive, and it will also pay back any unauthorised advice fees it charged to dead customers with interest in the past 7 years. Now, the bank has audited 142,000 accounts and so far found that 12 deceased estates have been charged unauthorised fees between April and June 2018. Now, as part of its remediation program, the CBA will also scrap certain fees on legacy wealth products from January 2019. So they'll still have to pay them until then. You can see a vision of ANZ. Now, the fallout from the Royal Commission continues. Yesterday, ANZ announced its profit will take a $711 million hit because it's got higher costs. Much of that includes compensation that it is paying out to customers who were stung by poor banking practices.
The Royal Banking Commission continues to have ripple effects right across the banking sector.
It does indeed, and we'll hear from many of the bank executives in November.
All right, now let's turn our attention to Google, and Google is shutting down its own social media.
Well, that's right. Now, Google Plus, as it's known, was launched in 2011 to compete with Facebook, and it very quickly became known as a failed attempt to compete with Facebook. So after many years of speculation that it was going to be shut down, Google is bringing Google Plus to an end for its customers. And this also comes after a data breach. User data was left exposed, and this is being reported in the Wall Street Journal. It says a bug in its software meant that information that people believed was private has been accessible by third parties. Google says up to 500,000 users have been affected, and according to the report, an internal Google memo said that if it did make this public, it would draw immediate regulatory interest, so it wasn't going to inform the public of this, just simply shut down the network.
It's not often that Google actually admits that it's done wrong.
Well, I don't think it was meant to be making that public.
No. How's the market looking, Alicia?
Yeah, we're seeing big concerns about the effect of the US-China trade war on China's economy playing out on the Australian share market. Stocks are down across the boards very sharply. We're seeing the All Ords down 1% at the moment. The ASX 200 index off a similar amount. It really is the technology stocks that are taking the biggest hit, along with a number of other companies, including Cochlear, Appen and Resolute. CBA shares are only off slightly, even despite announcing that refund program. Companies that are also selling globally and selling into China are taking a hit, but there are some companies that are pointing higher, and you can see those on the screen there, including Fortescue and Sims Metal. Turning across to Asia now, and trade is unwinding. Japan's market is down 1.3%. New Zealand's market has fallen around 0.8%. We will see those Chinese markets online shortly. Turning to US markets, where concerns about the impact of the trade war did dent investor sentiment, but the Dow Jones managed to claw back some ground by the end of trade, up 0.5% by the close. A quick check of commodity markets now, and we can see that spot gold prices are climbing, given that risk is certainly off the table today. Crude oil prices are fairly flat, and the Australian dollar has been coming down against the greenback, though it is bouncing a little bit in the midday session. It's still holding around a 2.5-year low, though, at 70.8 US cents. Fauziah.
Alicia, thanks very much. Now, a Perth man leading the company behind the first tourist trips into space says that galactic careers could soon be launched here in Australia. Enrico Palermo's comments come as WA looks to host the Australian Space Agency headquarters. David Webber has more.
Virgin Galactic's spaceship company is preparing its history-making passenger flights for next year, and its president says WA is well placed to get a part of it in the future.
So hopefully in the next few months we will fly our first space flight for Unity and then do several space flights before starting commercial service sometime in 2019.
But the company's taking its time to get it right, especially after the 2014 disaster when a co-pilot died and a pilot was injured.
We took it as an opportunity to take a step back and really consider what else could go wrong on a mission. And so a lot of changes to the cockpit and the human-machine interface, a lot more analysis, looking at the loads in the vehicle.
Enrico Palermo believes future rocket scientists and astronauts may not have to leave Australia to chase their dreams.
I had a lifelong passion to pursue a career in space and unfortunately had to leave Perth to go do that. But what's phenomenally exciting for me is with the formation of the agency, I think there's a real catalyst to make careers in space.
The state is now aiming to host the Australian Space Agency headquarters, and it appears to have some support.
The European Space Agency is here. We've got the Square Kilometre Array project, we've got the supercomputer, we've got companies engaging with our researchers in several areas. So the potential and momentum in Western Australia is pretty clear at this conference.
The Australian Space Agency is expected to make a recommendation to government by the end of the year. David Webber, ABC News.
Time for sports now with Andre Leslie in the studio with me. Now let's first talk cricket. A tough time. The Aussies are facing a tough time in the UAE.
They certainly are, Fauziah. It's against Pakistan. This series is not really starting quite as the Aussies would have liked. Overnight, the first few overs of the day started well. Peter Siddle got an early wicket, but the Pakistanis clawed their way up to 482. So that's a huge first innings total that the Australians are going to have to get into. Siddle was the bowler of the day, but there was a wicket for Marnus Labuschagne on his debut. Mainly a batsman, but got an important leg-spinning wicket. Haris Sohail scored his first century for Pakistan, very patient, 110 off 240 balls. A lot of blocking mixed with plenty of aggression as well towards the end. So a nice moment for him. And the Aussies now are batting and have got to none for 30 at the end of the day. Aaron Finch and Usman Khawaja at stumps didn't lose their wicket and going okay, but a huge deficit to bring in. Debutant Marnus Labuschagne spoke after the game and told us all how it felt to get his first wicket.
Obviously, been working on my bowling for probably for a long time, but last 3 months in specific, just getting a bit faster through the air and just making sure I'm bowling the right length. And we've been working really hard with Shree and with John Davidson back at home and making sure we get that length right. And so it was pleasing to see it come off today. I was able to come on and not go for too many runs, and also then was lucky enough to get a wicket as well.
All right, another Aussie also facing a difficult time, this time at the Shanghai Masters. What's happening with Nick Kyrgios?
Yeah, well, he's out in the first round. I think that's the quick summary. We'll have a little bit of a look at some of the vision from this game against Bradley Clarn, who's world number 104. It was not a particularly impressive showing from Kyrgios. I've watched a fair bit of the game now, and there are huge chunks of the game where he appears to be making very little effort. And say what you like, but it looks bad. We'll see a few points here, but what was even stranger was that he actually won the first set, Kyrgios. So he was up 6-4 and then went down the next two sets. We're seeing some footage there from the second set. But a big moment for the American, Clarn, beating world number 38, Kyrgios. Kyrgios now slips to third-ranked Aussie in the world, and he is in danger of not being seeded for the Australian Open next year. So this has not been a hunting ground that has brought much joy there in Shanghai. He was fined $10,000 for unsportsmanlike conduct there last year. He got a talking to from the referee, and then this one to finish, check the messages after the game. So I got to say, personally, I'm not impressed.
Check the messages, or is he looking at his Instagram feed there?
I'm not sure what it is, but again, it's just not a good look. He might be able to talk his way out of it, but personally, I'm not impressed.
So what's this about an all-NRL star making headlines in the UK?
Yeah, well, this is Ben Barber, who has gone out of the headlines here in Australia. He went and left the competition a couple of years ago in controversy, and left the Sharks after being found guilty of illicit drug use for the second time, being suspended from the NRL. But he's having a great time over in the UK. For St Helens, he's just won the top individual honour in the English Super League, and this is the Man of Steel Award. And he's the only one of very few people that have won the Dally M in Australia and the Man of Steel Award over in the Super League over in the UK. So very good signs for North Queensland Cowboys fans, because Barber is coming back after leaving the Sharks in 2016. He is going to be coming back, and he's signed a one-year deal here in the NRL with the Cowboys, and he is just moving really well. Scored 28 tries this season over in the UK.
Well, what about Sam Kerr? Just can't stop her, can you?
No.
She's up for another award.
She is up for another award. Hopefully this one goes a bit better. This is the Ballon d'Or for female athletes, and Ballon d'Or is a pretty famous award. It's been around since the 50s, organised by French magazine France Football. First time that women are going to be included in the awards, and Sam Kerr is nominated with Brazilian star Marta and Jennifer Morachan from Germany. So some big names that she's up against, but she's done very well to get nominated there. We also will expect to see that announced around the start of December. So a little bit of time, but let's hope she goes well there. If she does win, maybe it's time to improve her goal celebrations. They're pretty good, but let's have a quick look at this one, just for a bit of fun, from Reuben Kazan youth team player Norik Avdalyan. I think I have to see that again, but it looks like a backflip from the spot. So Sam Kerr, something to work on there, maybe for next Matilda's game, if she could do something like that. Maybe that will guarantee her an award.
No doubt. It's always good to see her on stage. Thank you so much, Andre.
No worries.
It's time for a check of the weather now with Nate Byrne.
Good morning. Most of the cloud on the satellite picture is being caused by a series of troughs and lows laying over the country. That means lots of thunderstorms and shower activity, and there's a high in the southwest. That's driving some onshore winds into the bite. We'll see some showers out of that for the coast, but also it's pushing moisture into central Australia. That's what's feeding those troughs to bring us lots of stormy weather. And in Queensland, after a stormy evening yesterday, we've got more wet and stormy weather for the southeast of the state and for the southern interior. Severe storms are possible later on as well, and some gusty storms for the southwest. They'll likely be dry though, so no rainfall out of that, but the rest of the state is staying clear. Brisbane, you've got a possible shower or storm today, getting to 28 degrees. For the south, wet and stormy weather for the southwest of New South Wales. We'll see showers making it across into the southeast for this evening. Also, a chance of some storms in the northeast as well. Sydney, a dry day for you. Cloud increasing though, 24 degrees. Canberra, expect a late shower or two, 23. And a wet one is expected for Victoria. We've got showers extending across the state. It'll tend to rain in the west, maybe some storms and some heavy falls there as well. Melbourne, the showers will increase through the day. It's 19 degrees for you. And some showers across Tasmania will largely ease, just sticking around for the east and the south coast later. Also snow on the forecast, down to 900 metres. For Hobart, some showers. It's becoming windy as well, 16 degrees today. A wet one for the southeastern quarter of South Australia. It'll increase some showers to rain for the lower southeast, and we'll see some falls for the coasts as well. Adelaide's getting a shower or two, 18 degrees. And over in Western Australia, there are some coastal showers in the south and some wet and stormy weather developing for the southwest later on. For Perth, it's a shower or two, maybe a storm as well. It's 27 degrees today. Further north, there's a chance of a storm for the Kimberley and also for the central and southern parts of the territory. Just fairly isolated though. Darwin, a sunny day, getting to 35. Tomorrow we'll see wet and stormy weather persisting in the west and also in the east, which means more possible storms on the forecast for Perth and Brisbane. Some showers for Sydney, Canberra and Adelaide. A dry day in the southeast, and Darwin staying sunny. Now looking ahead for the rest of the week, we'll see falls continuing in the east. Also through the north, Queensland is expecting some widespread falls and storms on Friday. Another system is approaching the west as well. In fact, for the next week, it looks like much of the country is expecting some wet weather, 15 to 20 millimetres across much of drought-affected New South Wales, and potentially some very heavy falls for Queensland southeast.
The top stories on ABC News. The New South Wales Sports Minister Stuart Ayres is defending the decision to promote a horse race on the sales of the Sydney Opera House. Images advertising this weekend's Everest race will be projected onto the building tonight. More than 250,000 people have signed a petition against the promotion. Racing stewards have conducted the barrier draw and suspended all betting. Abortion clinic protection zones are under scrutiny in the High Court today. There's been a challenge to Victorian and Tasmanian laws from anti-abortion campaigners. Kathleen Clubb is fighting a conviction and fine after she was charged for handing out pamphlets near a Melbourne clinic. Tasmanian John Preston is also fighting a law which saw him arrested over a protest. The Federal Environment Minister, Melissa Price, says it would be irresponsible to commit to the phasing out of coal by 2050. A report from leading climate scientists say such a move is needed to prevent global temperatures rising by more than 1.5 degrees. Ms. Price says she hasn't read the UN report and that Australia is on track to meet its climate change targets. US President Donald Trump has presided over the ceremonial swearing-in of new US Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh at the White House. Mr. Kavanaugh was officially sworn in on Sunday by the court's Chief Justice John Roberts. The ceremony provided an opportunity for Mr. Trump to celebrate his second nominee being confirmed to the court. Let's go back to our top story, and New South Wales Sports Minister Stuart Ayres is defending the advertisement for a horse race on the Sydney Opera House. He's labelled the debate over the matter, quote, a little hysterical.
We want to make sure that we promote New South Wales right around the country and around the world. We want to leverage our fantastic cultural institutions, our sporting events, to really showcase New South Wales on the world stage. My role is to make sure that we do that, work with people from the Opera House, from Racing New South Wales to sporting institutions. I don't shy away from the fact that I'm a #1 fan when it comes to Team New South Wales, and anything I can do to promote New South Wales is me just doing my job. No doubt, I definitely worked with Racing New South Wales on coming up with the idea for the Opera House. We weren't able to use the Harbour Bridge in the short time that we had available for the barrier draw. I think what we will see tonight is a very elegant demonstration on the sales of the Opera House that will be something that all of Sydney can be proud of. I think it's been a little bit hysterical, to be honest with you. I think this is a good opportunity for New South Wales and Sydney to come together. We should be very, very proud of the fantastic events, whether they are our cultural events at the Sydney Opera House or the Everest at Royal Randwick or the NRL Grand Final or even events like Run West right here today. These are all opportunities where people around New South Wales can come together and celebrate what I think is the best state in the country and the best city on earth.
The inquest into the deaths of 4 people at Dreamworld on the Gold Coast is today hearing testimony from a former safety officer about the deadly ride. The inquiry is looking at how Cindy Lowe, Kate Goodchild, her brother Luke Dorset and his partner Ruzu Aragi died on the Thunder River Rapids ride 2 years ago. Control room operator Nigel Irwin and safety officer John Clark are giving evidence today. A former employee, Stephen Buss, is also due to speak. He was involved in a 2014 incident where a raft on the ride flipped, but no one was injured. At yesterday's hearing, a Dreamworld maintenance boss conceded there was a total failure by everybody at the theme park to identify safety issues relating to the deadly ride. Turkey is demanding permission to search Saudi Arabia's consulate in Istanbul over the disappearance of a prominent Saudi journalist. Jamal Khashoggi hasn't been seen since he visited the consulate a week ago. Our Middle East correspondent Adam Harvey has more.
Turkish authorities want to find out where Jamal Khashoggi is. They want to get inside the consulate to have a look and, I suppose, make sure he's not in one of the rooms inside the consulate. We all know that he's not there. The authorities there, the consul has already taken the media on a tour of the consulate to prove that Jamal Khashoggi is not inside. So we know he's not inside. We're pretty sure he's not inside. The Turkish President Erdogan says that he wants to know exactly where he is. He says the Saudis will have proof of what's happened to him, presumably CCTV footage at the embassy showing whether he in fact left We know that he went in last Tuesday. His fiancée, his Turkish fiancée, was waiting outside for him. He handed her his mobile phone and went inside. He never came back out to her anyway. There's been speculation about what exactly happened to him inside and what might have happened to his body if in fact he was killed. But really they are rumours being fed, I think, by the Turkish authorities to some of the press inside Turkey. Saudi Arabia is saying, well, we don't know what's happened to Jamal Khashoggi. The Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who would be the one who, I suppose, would be responsible if he, in fact, if something has in fact happened to him, has said that he doesn't know where he is and he wants to get to the bottom of the matter too. He's probably the most prominent critic of Saudi Arabia outside the country. It's impossible to criticise the actions of the Crown Prince inside Saudi Arabia. You're arrested for doing that. Here is a very powerful former editor, a former advisor to previous Saudi rulers who has a big platform. He's got over 1 million Twitter followers. He's a columnist for the Washington Post. He's invited to talk around the world, and he has been very critical of the Crown Prince and this veneer of reform that he says is occurring in Saudi Arabia. You know, they're allowing women to drive. They're doing things like letting people take part in yoga or opening up of movie theatres. But underneath these liberalisations, he says, Saudi Arabia really hasn't changed much at all. And in fact, dissidents are more likely to be arrested these days. They're just disappearing.
Adam Harvey there with that report. Now, farmers say they cannot wait for an agriculture-specific visa as labour shortages intensify. An agriculture visa which would allow foreign workers into the country to overcome farm labour shortages is currently under consideration by the Australian government. Rural reporter Clint Jasper joins us now. So, Clint, just explain to us, is it difficult for farmers to find labour?
Faz, there's two ways that it's difficult for farmers. First of all, there's just not the raw numbers of people around at the specific times we need them, because you've got to remember a lot of crops, you know, when they're ready to be picked, they have to come off and then the work dries up afterwards. So it's hard to source the number of workers, and very few workers return to the same farm to harvest again. So farmers spend a lot of time and money training people every year to work in their specific packing shed or picking whatever type of produce it is. So they're the two major headaches when it comes to finding labour on farms at the moment.
And how would this visa address those particular concerns?
Right, so farmers can already access labour through backpackers, working holiday makers, but ever since the backpacker tax debacle, that labour source has taken a dent. Of the 15% tax that backpackers now pay has dried up that source of labour. There's also access to the seasonal workers program, which allows farmers to bring in workers from Timor-Leste and the Pacific Islands. But farmers told us that that scheme is quite rigid, so the workers have to arrive and leave on very specific dates, and that's regardless of whether harvest has already started or whether it hasn't finished yet. So we come to the ag visa, and what farmers are asking for is a flexible scheme that allows workers to come in from overseas, work for the amount of time that they're required, and they return to the farm every harvest, so that retraining aspect is solved as well. That's what they're really crying out for when they call for a flexible labour scheme to access those workers.
And as we understand it, the plan has already been criticised by some Pacific Islander governments. Have any farmers shared those concerns?
Yeah, you've got to remember that the seasonal worker program has been running for a while now, and a lot of those workers from the Pacific and Timor-Leste have been coming to the same farm. So there are strong relationships between farmers and those workers, and that program has a strong foreign aid element to it as well. So there are people who are cautious about not disrupting that plan and having any new visa sit alongside it and not interfere with it. There's also concerns about how rushed it's been to get this up and running and what kind of process would result from that. Ben Cant is a citrus farmer from South Australia and the CEO of Citrus Australia, and he's concerned that the process is being a little bit rushed.
So I'm concerned that something will be released half-baked. We need to have good industry consultation so we don't ruin one program to initiate another.
One would think, though, Clint, that it would just be easier to employ more local people. So why don't the farmers do just that?
This is the eternal bugbear for a lot of farmers. It's something they get told to do a lot, but as I said, the mango harvest, for instance, is on now. It only runs from August to November, so they're not really suitable jobs for someone living in a small community. First of all, there's not that many people around. Andrew Bulmer, for instance, is a lettuce farmer. He recruits year-round and says local people just aren't there.
We would happily employ and fill these jobs with Australian people if they were here on the ground. The reality is that they're not, so that's why that we need to tap in to a visa category like this to fulfil our needs.
So, all right, so now we understand that why the farmers really need this particular visa. Has the government said when it'll be available?
Late last month, the Nationals said it would be delivered in a matter of weeks. But that plan was put on ice by some senior Liberal colleagues who had concerns about how it would interfere with the seasonal workers program and some diplomatic headaches that caused. The latest information we have is that the government plans to deliver it by the end of the year, but no one publicly has seen any detail about what it will look like or how they'll address those specific concerns around interfering with the seasonal worker program.
Clint Jasper, thank you. In 2010, water polo champion Kelly Lane was found guilty of killing her newborn baby Tegan. She's maintained her innocence throughout, insisting that she gave the infant to her father, a man who's never been found. Well, tonight, in the final of a three-part investigation, reporter Carol Meldrum-Hanna speaks to the homicide detective who led the investigation.
Former Detective Senior Constable Sharon Rhodes, she investigated Kelly Lane for 2 years. And it was intensive and exhaustive, and she then continued to investigate Kelly Lane through the trial. Now, what Sharon says is that although her gut feeling and her belief is that Kelly Lane murdered Tegan, she raises serious concerns about the evidence and about the trial and about the process. In Sharon Rhodes' own opinion, she believes that due process wasn't followed. She thinks that the jury didn't hear from two crucial witnesses. She believes they were crucial. One who actually could have corroborated Kelly Lane's story of having a fling with this Andrew character at the right time. She also says that the police investigation wasn't complete by the time the trial began. She says that she raised those concerns, and she also reveals how over these years investigating Kelly Lane, the police just kept running into dead ends. They tapped her phone, bugged her house. They obtained covert DNA samples. They even had an undercover operative to befriend Lane in an effort to get information, but they just didn't get anything. So by the time, circumstantial, yes, but no bulletproof evidence there that Kelly Lane had murdered Tegan. So by the time the trial began, it was very much circumstantial. And we have a document that you will see tonight, and you can jump up onto News Online at the moment to read more about it, an internal police document that shows police were questioning whether they even had enough to charge Lane with murder by the end of their investigation in 2008, and referred it off to the DPP for an advising to see will it ever get there. And Rhodes says herself she just wanted to know, because if the DPP came back and said, no, not interested, there's not a reasonable prospect, I mean, the police were thinking, should we just drop it now? Because we aren't charging her yet.
Now, Exposed, the case of Kelly Lane concludes tonight at 8:30 on ABC TV. You can catch the series on iView. The High Court today begins hearing a case brought by two anti-abortion activists fined for protesting outside fertility control clinics. Now, the states of Victoria and Tasmania banned protests within 150 metres of abortion clinics to prevent women from being harassed. But these two protesters argue that the laws breach the implied right to political speech under the Constitution. Damien Carrick joins me now from Melbourne to discuss the case. So, Damien, can you tell us about these two protesters challenging the safe zone laws in Victoria and Tasmania? What do we know about them?
Victorian Kathleen Clubb was fined $5,000 when she approached a couple trying to enter an abortion clinic in Melbourne a few years ago. And apparently the couple batted her away. The woman moved away and the man rejected her offer of a pamphlet. The other person who was fined, I think, $3,000 is Queenslander John Graham Preston. And he was fined $3,000 for standing with a placard outside a Hobart abortion clinic a couple of years ago. So they've both taken their cases to the High Court.
Now, the Caston Centre for Human Rights have gotten involved. What information will they be providing to the High Court?
Yes, well, look, what they have done, they're one of a number of organisations which have been known as amicus curiae, friends of the court, so they get to present information that the court wouldn't otherwise hear. They did some research where they talked to people who work in abortion clinics about the impact of these Victorian laws, which are a few years old now. And they said that before these laws, there were often very confrontational, very, very angry protests, and this had an impact on patients. So, for instance, they said that after running the gauntlet of protesters, women might need more pain relief than they might otherwise have. They might not have been in a state to a calm state in order to kind of undergo a procedure. And they also might have chosen not to come back for follow-up appointments because they were so upset by what they had endured.
Now, another organisation, you mentioned a few organisations that's involved. Another organisation is Liberty Works. What's their take on the case? Yeah, so it's one of the other organisations which is putting forward its information to the court, and it comes to it from a completely different point of view. It's a small Brisbane-based organisation which is concerned about small government and personal freedoms, and it's been active in the space in issues like in its opposition to things like 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act and opposition to subsidies for renewable energy. Its view is that this is an unjustifiable infringement on free speech. And we already have laws which prevent people from, being assaulted or attacked, and these laws are unnecessary. Now, abortion is always, Damien, as we know, a very emotional issue, but the High Court will be judging on the legal aspects of this particular case. So what will it be asked to decide on? Well, what's very interesting is that the governments of Tasmania and Victoria will first up argue that this isn't political speech at all. And indeed, all the Attorneys General from the Commonwealth and also a lot of other states which have similar sorts of laws will be arguing the same thing. They'll be saying, look, this isn't political speech because you're not trying to change a law here. You're just trying to get in the face of somebody as they're making a personal choice. It'll be interesting to see whether that argument flies because, Fauziah, if you are picketing a workplace, if you're a unionist, if you're trying to prevent a logging truck getting in and out of a forest, if you do, all sorts of things are about impacting on a choice being made at that particular moment in time rather than changing the law. So I think our definition of what is free speech or political communication is quite broad. The second, if that doesn't fly, then the court will be having to look at to what degree do these laws impact on people's ability to convey their ideas or communicate their views or political views. And then that becomes the issue then becomes whether or not what degree is the infringement and whether or not that there's another legitimate goal which is consistent with representative and responsible government. And in this case, the people in support of these laws will say, actually, what we're trying to do is reduce, say, distress and anxiety of people, allow for access to medical treatment, and that's what this law is primarily about. And you can read it. You can read down this idea of political communication because it's less important than this other goal. It certainly sounds like a very complex issue, Damien. I'm looking forward to hearing it on the Law Report this afternoon at 5:30 p.m. on RN. It's also available, I take it, anytime as podcast on the ABC Listen app. Damien Carrick, always good talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Fauziah.
Let's turn our attention to Spain now, where a former doctor has escaped jail for stealing newborn babies and supplying them to infertile couples during the dictatorship. That's the Franco dictatorship. Now, a Madrid court found 85-year-old gynecologist Eduardo Vela had committed the crimes, but he could not legally be convicted because too much time had elapsed. Now, for more on this story, I am joined by Dr. Nick Manganas, a contemporary Spain course coordinator at the lecturer at the University of Technology, Sydney. Nick, it's always good talking to you. Thank you so much for coming in, speaking to us. As I understand it, this is just the first of many, many cases that may be coming about. And it occurred during the Franco dictatorship. Was it a common occurrence during that dictatorship?
Yes. So basically all of the evidence that's been unearthed in the last few decades has shown that it was much more extended than actually first thought. So we need to remember that the Franco dictatorship started in 1939 after the Civil War in Spain and didn't finish until 1975. So that's 36 years of dictatorship. And we know that this process was actually quite extended all the way right from the beginning. So the Spanish Civil War was actually a war between, the left and the right, between nationalists and Republicans. So a lot of the kind of communists at the time in the 1930s had sent their children overseas, and then the Franco dictatorship, one of the main aims was to kind of bring those children back and incorporate them back into kind of Catholic society.
This was an actual government policy?
Yes, yes. I mean, it was a dictatorship, so as far as you can call it an official policy, yes, it was. And apart from those kind of children, though, there was, there were lots of babies of women that were kind of in prison, lots of women, for example, that were unmarried and so on. So these women were actually kind of left, had their babies stolen in clinics by gynecologists, by nurses, by the medical establishment.
And where would the babies then go?
They were usually given to what were considered kind of good Catholic Spanish families, families that could not have children, or families that were considered kind of good families to actually raise these children.
I take it, as we were just talking then, thousands of babies, thousands of children have been taken away from their families. Have there been efforts to try to reunite these families?
Yes, yes. So basically, after the transition to democracy, a lot of these kind of issues were not really kind of dealt with in publicly. It was called like a kind of an era of kind of forgetting and silence, because the country wanted to kind of to move on into this kind of new democratic kind of system. So most of the kind of victims of these sorts of policies did not actually do anything about it in the 1980s and late 1970s when the transition actually occurred. So basically, a lot of this kind of movement actually started with the grandchildren. So they were kind of one generation removed from what was going on, and it was really kind of post-2004, more or less, that a huge kind of effort has kind of been made to kind of reunite families and to really discover what actually happened.
It must have been very traumatic for many of them. Has there been an official apology?
No. Yes, no. There has been some kind of recognition, but it's been a bit kind of scant. A lot of these kind of, it kind of depends on who is in government at the time, and these are kind of very sensitive issues. I mean, these are issues that are still going on. They're still talking about kind of exhuming Franco's body now in 2018. So this is not something that's kind of buried, and that and a lot of these people are still alive, as this case kind of demonstrates.
It's good talking to you, Nick Manganas. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, taking a quick look at the weather around the nation today. Brisbane, a possible shower or storm. Sydney, cloud increasing. Canberra, a late shower or two. Melbourne, showers increasing. Hobart, showers becoming windy. Adelaide, a shower or two. Perth, showers with a possible storm. And Darwin, sunny with a top of 35. And thanks for your company here on ABC News. I'm Fauziah Ibrahim. In the next hour, we'll get more details over the furor surrounding the advertising campaign promoting the Everest horse race on the sales of the Opera House. Do stay with us here on ABC News Channel.